good about it as panic buying hits British supermarkets as two women in Australia are arrested for fighting in an aisle over who could cram the most toilet paper into their shopping trolley, and as Italy, with Lombardy, one of its biggest regions, quarantining an entire region, there is deep, deep concern about the coronavirus crisis. Well, let's get an update on the situation here in the United Kingdom, and I'm joined this morning by Professor John Oxford, leading virologist from Queen Mary College, University of London. John, good morning to you.
Yes, good morning, Nigel.
Could you give us an update on the numbers in the UK, please?
Yeah, I'm the last person in the world to have the numbers in my head.
Okay.
All I know is there'll be more today than yesterday.
Right, okay, well, what I got was 209 now confirmed cases, and clearly spreading quite quickly now.
Yes, well, relatively quick. It's not like if it were flu. If it were flu now, sorry, I'm a flu virologist, there would be tens of thousands of people infected. So I still have to put this in perspective. Okay. You know, and you say about bad news. There's some quite good news globally, because China seems to have got a grip on it. With just public health, what we're doing, the death figures are coming down. The increased things have been reduced. Mm-hmm. So that is really quite something. And actually, I'm looking on Italy as good news, because I was just hoping they're going to take some action and not just let the whole thing blow out of. And they are taking action. So it depends how you read it, doesn't it? I read those two things as rather good news.
So in China, I mean, is this a case of quarantining has actually worked?
I think so. Oh yes, I mean they've when you think about it, they've sacrificed almost everything, their economy, the country, to try and break the back of this virus.
Yes.
And I think they're succeeding. I mean, the Wuhan, certainly the figures are coming way down. That's where it all started. So it's a very impressive and sets an example for all the rest of us. So I'm glad that Italy has copied them and to try and stop it in this, and I think they will. And we should be prepared to do probably more than we are. I mean, I would like football matches stopped and so on and so forth, but we are where we are. So they've set an example. And I'll tell you one thing is happening. They've set an example that the people are coming back to China from Europe and reinfecting, spreading the infection into places of China where they've not yet had it. So that's not so good.
No, that's not so good. I mean, I have to say, I've been bemused that we've still been, allowing flights into the United Kingdom from northern Italy, from Tehran, from South Korea. They've still been coming into Heathrow Airport with not a single person being stopped and checked. And I just wonder, in your view, do you think Boris Johnson's government has shown some strong leadership over this?
Well, not the Prime Minister himself. I wish he were more participating in the hand washing and that sort of thing. And him and the American chap running around saying they're not going to wash their hands and they're going to shake hands and all this sort of thing. Yeah. I would rather see that nailed down, quite frankly. I'd like to see leadership. I'd like to see an example being set. I think the rest of them are okay, and I'd like to see the things happening now. I mean, I'd like to see a bit more putting a foot on social distancing. There's no kissing, hugging. Mm-hmm. You see, this virus, you don't pick up this virus from the road or from a tree or out in the street. You pick it up from another person getting too close to them, and all this being friendly, like the Italians love to do, actually, and we all love to do, but that could put you vulnerable to picking up. So we don't have to change our habits for the rest of our lives. But I'd like to see, I view it like, this people business, like you get people funding, don't you, for funding in for everyone puts a little bit in. Yeah. If we did people public health, everyone contributed a little bit, maybe push off a foreign trip, maybe stop hugging, maybe get away, and so on, then I think we would have that virus would feel very, very pressurized.
Interesting. Now, John, help me with this, because there was some confusion on Friday as to exactly where we were in terms of the stages of coronavirus, because first on Friday morning we heard this, and stay with me, we heard this from Chief Medical Officer Professor Chris Whitty.
I would say we've moved from a situation where we were mainly in contain with some delay built in to we're now basically mainly delay, but we're maintaining some of the elements.
In the second stage.
Mainly in the second stage at this point in time.
So that was Chris Whitty. And then, John, later on, Boris Johnson said this.
But the situation is pretty much as it has been, in the sense that we're still, Sam, in the contained phase.
So, help me. Who's right? Who's wrong? Is the Prime Minister right? I mean, we're looking for leadership. We want at least some clarity of message here. Where do you assess we are with this?
Well, Nigel, the virus virus itself, let's look at it from the virus perspective. The virus does not recognise stages 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Not.
All the virus wants is a few more people to infect. It's got to keep moving. Unless these viruses keep moving, they die. They have to. They don't last very long. If they fall on the surface, maybe half a day or something. They've got to get moving. So it couldn't care less about stages we're at.
No.
It just wants more people to infect. I'll tell you one thing that is to think about as well. I know all the predictions are from the mathematical models, and I don't usually believe them. There's going to be a huge wave of infection and all these deaths. I don't believe that for 1 minute. And what tends to happen, and this happened in the past in the flu, certainly, say in 57, 68, 2009. These infections come in waves. They don't all come together. They come in waves. And on top of that, the waves don't hit the whole country at the same time. So you might very well have a situation where they've got their phase, whatever they call it, in London, but in the north of England, they're still 2 phases behind. So that's what I mean. The virus looks at it in a different way. So I'm not so keen on this phase, that phase. It looks to be a bit bureaucratic. But if it kicks them off themselves to get the preventative social distancing and all this underway, then so be it.
And an Easter peak is what we're being told again. Is that just people just sort of complete shot in the dark?
It's a bit to predict. I mean, what I'm hoping... What I wish is, I tell you what my wish list is, I wish this morning, when I woken up, had my cup of tea, on that Sunday and all that stuff, I wish that in my pocket there was a pill, like with flu or like these other things, I get in problems with this virus, I take the antiviral pill. Now, drugs are being what are called repurposed. There are 20, 50, 100,000 antiviral drugs against Hep C, HIV, and all these others. Some of them possibly will have an effect against this corona, and they're being tested now. So we might have, in the next few weeks or couple of months, even a drug. We've got one which is pushing along, actually, it's not licensed yet, but there is one. The second thing I like in my pocket is a rapid test, so that you can get a result in, say, 15, 20 minutes. I think that will come as well. The third thing will be this magical vaccine. And I suspect there's so many people working on it. The Chinese are working on it, the Russians,
Americans,
the whole world. Here in England, they're working as well. So I'll be very surprised if by winter time there's not a vaccine. And what I feel about this virus, it will become seasonal. It will, I think, perhaps the summer and the spring will begin to halt it, just like it has with flu. I mean, 5,000 people this winter in England have died of flu. And now the figures are going down now because the spring's coming along. And I'm hoping that what we do, it's not the virus itself, it's what we do, that is, I'm not doing it yesterday, sitting out in the garden, whereas a few days before it was too cold. So now our habits will change as the weather gets better, and that could hit this virus on the head again, because we're getting further apart just naturally standing outside.
John, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And the message there from Professor John Oxford is we can all do our little bit to try and slow the spread of this virus. And I thought, actually, he was being quite reassuring in many ways, and pointing out that winter flu very often is far, far worse than anything even Italy has seen at the moment. But the news overnight from Italy is quite drastic, and it is that 16 million people have been placed under forced quarantine. The government approved drastic measures in an attempt to stop the spread of coronavirus. And just before I came on air, I spoke to Philip Willan, a freelance journalist based in Rome, and he told me about the number of cases.
The numbers have been increasing inexorably despite efforts to contain the epidemic in the north of the country. There was a spike yesterday of 1,200 cases, bringing the total to 5,000, more than 5,800. And the total of deaths rose to 233. Since the beginning of the emergency. So clearly there's an impression that things were not under control, and tougher action was needed to try and get a grip on this crisis.
So now we have some very radical internal travel restrictions within Italy. I mean, is this right, that the whole of Lombardy is now somewhere that people cannot enter and cannot leave?
Well, that is the case, but apparently exceptions are allowed in the case of people who have urgent work reasons or personal family reasons for travelling. It seems that police and the army will be allowed to question them on their reasons for travelling and will give a verdict on whether the reason is sufficiently serious to justify moving out of this very large red zone in the north of the country.
And is it just Lombardy where these restrictions apply?
No, the restrictions apply in Lombardy, which is a large and wealthy region containing the financial capital of the country, Milan. But they also apply in Venice, and they apply in around 11 or 12 other provinces, mainly in the north, but also in the Marches in the centre of Italy. So it's a fairly wide area, mainly in the north of the country, though.
And it's Sunday, of course, and people will be expecting the Pope to appear. I hear it's now going to be a video.
That's right. It's going to be a video. The Pope himself has been suffering from a cold, and so he decided to skip spiritual exercises outside Rome that he would otherwise have been participating in. But in order to discourage faithful from gathering in St. Peter's Square, he'll be speaking, leading prayers on a video link, so visible on television and social media, and with the intention of discouraging the faithful from gathering in St. Peter's Square as they normally would on a Sunday.
No, extraordinary stuff. Now, these quarantines are due to last until the 3rd of April, as I understand it, and clearly the Italian economy was already in a bit of trouble before this even began. What measures can the Italian government take, given the sheer scale of this problem?
Well, I think it's extremely difficult. The quarantine zone is the industrial heartland of the country, so it's going to have a huge impact on industrial production and the generation of wealth that would normally take place. Of course, Italy lives to a very considerable degree from tourism, and already the fear of the virus has squelched the desire of people to visit Italy, and obviously this makes it even more difficult, not to say impossible, for tourists to go to Venice, for example. So it's going to have a very severe impact on hotels, restaurants, bars. I think all the government can do is provide emergency financial help for people and businesses who are in difficulty, but it's going to be extremely difficult and extremely painful for the country, but it seems there isn't really much of an alternative.
I noticed on Saturday that it was £38 return to Milan. I presume that if I wanted, I mean, not that I do, but if I wanted to fly to Milan now, presumably I can't do that.
I would imagine not, unless, I suppose, you had a serious family or professional reason for wanting to go. I think just normal travel for leisure, it would certainly not qualify.
Well, that was Philip Willan from Italy describing the situation. 16 million people in Lombardy now in lockdown. And yet, unbelievably, Neil in Swansea says, Nigel, according to Heathrow arrivals, flights are still coming in from Milan. Neil, we thought we'd check that message, and 2 flights from Milan have already arrived at Heathrow Airport this morning. There are more due later today, and I will bet you there are no checks going on with passengers landing from Milan whatsoever. And the thing I want to debate with you this morning is Boris Johnson showing leadership through this crisis? As far as I'm concerned, we're not even attempting to stop the spread of this, not even trying to stop the spread of this. I think it's very, very weak indeed. Even if winter flu at the moment appears to have killed many thousands more than this has, with just 2 fatalities in the UK and people who already had underlying conditions. If we're serious about this, surely people this morning should not be landing from Tehran, Milan, unchecked, getting onto the London Underground and goodness knows where else. I don't think the government's really got a grip of this. That is my view. Give me yours on 0345 6060973. This is Nigel Farage. It's Sunday morning and it's 20 past 10.
This is
Sophia Yan, China correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. Sophia, welcome to LBC. Good morning. Tell us, what are the numbers at the moment in China, and are infection rates now slowing down?
Well, globally, we've hit a milestone. There are more than 100,000 cases around the world, 80% of those in China, another 3,500 total dead. So in the last day, we've had less than 100 new cases, and that's the slowest increase in about a month. But remember, China, roughly 2 weeks ago, changed how it counts cases, and immediately after, the figures began to drop. The concern is that this may not accurately reflect the situation on the ground. On top of all that, we've got a hotel collapse. It's being used as a quarantine center, and about 10 dead, dozens more being rescued. And it just really speaks to how much effort has gone into dealing with the outbreak.
And in terms of quarantine, I mean, how ruthless, how rigid have the quarantine measures been?
It depends on where you are in China. The epicenter of the outbreak, Hubei province, is where residents have experienced the most severe lockdowns. But across the entire country, hundreds of millions of people are still under some sort of mobility or quarantine restriction at this very moment. The other issue that's come into play now is that China's faced with not just curbing infections within the country, but also ones that might be imported back in from elsewhere, from Iran, from Italy, from travelers coming outside of the country. And so now they're stepping up airport checks, Chinese authorities here, just trying to make sure they're catching the different possibilities of where this virus might be coming in from.
Yeah, and of course, a very large number of British expats living and working in Hong Kong, including a son of my own. What is the situation in Hong Kong, Sophia?
Well, Hong Kong is definitely remembering SARS. This is something that people in China and also Hong Kong, this is not something new to them. And so the SARS outbreak, they remember how badly the Chinese government response was nearly 20 years ago. And so it's not a good memory to have, the way that they're now going into this. And certainly fear is definitely there in Hong Kong. People are worried that they might see again this disease spread very quickly. And of course, we've had a couple of hundred cases in Hong Kong. I mean, this is something that is very difficult to contain. Clearly, the infection does spread rather rapidly. Many health systems completely overwhelmed with all these cases that are coming in.
Yes, no, absolutely. And finally, Sophia, talk of a vaccine, I saw perhaps by April of something maybe being effective.
Yes, there's scientists in China, the US, UK, all racing to develop a vaccine. Now, rapid genetic sequencing and open publication of the virus by Chinese researchers has been a boon, really, for those working on these vaccines and various treatments. Several labs are now trialing prototype vaccines in animals, and they're fairly confident that we could be moving into human testing next month. And that's definitely good news for those dealing with this, the health officials on the ground. And a lot of these vaccines, what they're trying to do is to target the so-called spike protein. That's the key protein in the coronavirus that invades human cells, leading to infection.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That was Sophia Yan, China correspondent from The Telegraph. And rate of infection slowing in China, but as she quite wisely said, the Chinese government have changed the way that they measure this, so you pay your money, you take your choice in terms of what you believe. But isn't that interesting? So if you fly today, right, from Milan or Tehran into China, you will be health checked at the airport. But if you fly today from Milan or Tehran into London Heathrow, you will not be health checked. You can pick up your kit and off you go on the London Underground or wherever else it may be. And my own feeling is that Boris Johnson is not showing sufficient leadership in this. Yes, I understand. At the press conference, the chief scientific officer, the chief medical officer had the lion's share of what was said and the questions that were asked from the media. And I'm not objecting to that. I just think the Prime Minister ought to be doing more. That's my feeling. But, Mike from Norwich said, as ever, Nigel, you speak my mind. But the government make their decisions on the economy. Well, Mike, yeah, they may well. think that economic considerations are more important than public health ones, although I'm not actually sure that's fair or sure that's true. Annie in Norwich says Boris is showing leadership following corona advice from all the medical experts. The media are being irresponsible and causing the panic. Annie, I'm not trying to cause panic. Indeed, we had Professor Oxford on earlier, who actually was saying, whoa, just calm down. Everyone changed their patterns of behaviour a bit, and this is going to be okay. So we are not on this show or this station trying to spread panic. I just think more could be done to stop the spread. And I think to have, at the end of last week, the Prime Minister directly contradicting the Chief Medical Officer, frankly, I just don't think it's good enough. Let's go to some callers. Let's go to Harry, who's a new caller from Wolverhampton. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning, welcome. So what do you think about the leadership being shown by the government?
Well, I just wanted to ask you if you think the government is doing enough, because personally I don't think they do, and at what point do we need to introduce more drastic measures to combat the spread of coronavirus in this country?
Well, if as we speak, Harry, there are people in the arrivals hall from Milan at Heathrow Airport and not one of them has been checked, I would have thought these are fairly obvious places to start, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but what confuses me is why aren't we doing these checks?
I don't know. Harry, I just don't know.
It's baffling, it really is.
Or is it, as my previous texter that I read out a couple of minutes ago, is it that they're worried about damaging the economy?
Well, it's people's health over the economy, really, isn't it, Nigel?
Well, I think in a situation like this it should be. And I think, if quarantining and checking and isolating, plus changes to human habits and behaviour, if this is the way to get a grip on this, that's what should be done. I mean, it was very interesting, I thought also, what Professor Oxford said earlier, was that Boris going around shaking everyone's hand, saying, it's fine, provided you wash your hands, nothing to worry about, was actually sending the wrong message.
Yep, definitely. But what we need to do, really, in situations like this, is, I know as a country we don't like listening to experts, but the health experts are the ones we need to listen to in this kind of situations. It's people like Piers Morgan who are trying to scaremonger people by putting out false information when, in fact, the 90,000 cases in the world, 45,000 have already recovered.
So you personally think Piers is part of the sort of glowing panic, do you?
Yeah, I do. He doesn't help it.
All right, well, Piers Morgan, if you're listening, you're free to come on and defend yourself. Harry, thank you for your call. After the news, it'll be no more guests, it'll just be you for the next half an hour, I promise. But it is now 10:30, and it was raised by Harry before the break. And Piers tweeted this out to his huge number of followers. I keep hearing people say, stop scaremongering about coronavirus. It only kills the elderly and those with an underlying illness, as if somehow we shouldn't care about them. He then continued, well, sorry, I do. And it's time everyone stopped being complacent about this. It's serious. Now, again, you make your own minds up on that. Do you think that is scaremongering? Actually, I don't. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing for Piers to have said. Is the government handling this crisis well? Is Boris Johnson giving the kind of leadership we need? Jenny says, yep, Boris is doing really well and showing leadership. Well, an area that I do not think he's showing leadership on, and I was banging on about it last week here on LBC, and I'm going to go on doing so. And I got a tweet in here from Long Ashton Lefty that says, just checked incoming flights for Bristol Airport, and they're still showing flights coming in from Milan and Venice, due to arrive this morning. Surely that is madness. Yeah, and we can add to that Gatwick. Yes, they're coming into Gatwick as well from Milan. So here we have a region, 16 million people quarantined. They're not allowed to leave that region and move to any other part of Italy, but you can get on an aeroplane, come to Bristol, come to Gatwick, come to Heathrow, and goodness knows where else, and even if you are a carrier of coronavirus, you won't even be medically checked. Isn't that just great? Isn't that brilliant? I'm sorry, we're not doing this properly. We're not even trying. We're not even trying to stop coronavirus coming into this country. I think it's pathetic. That's my view. We have a new caller from Hong Kong. Mark, hello there. Good afternoon.
Hi, good morning, Nigel.
Hello there.
First time on the show, thank you. Thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome. So, now, as I've said already, my son lives in Hong Kong, so I know things have not been much fun out there for the last few weeks. And I first heard, actually, Mark, nearly 3 weeks ago, about the run on toilet paper in supermarkets in Hong Kong, and that seems to run. I couldn't believe it when I was told it, and that's now happening here. What's the situation today in Hong Kong?
Well, I think it's going a bit more towards normality, to be honest with you. Like you mentioned the toilet paper as one example. People a couple of weeks ago were literally running to the store to get packs of toilet paper. Also, hand sanitizer was another one.
Yeah, same
here.
Hand
sanitizer was going up to £6 from a 50mm bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you look in the shops now, and they're packed with toilet paper. The hand sanitizer has gone down to about £1.50. So I think people are getting more just as a way of life at the moment. Like, in my personal opinion, it maybe differs a bit to yours on this. I think it's a bit of scaremongering, myself, personally. Now, I know it's in terms of, like, tragic, in terms of, like, the deaths and that side of things, of course, but I would say look at the facts. And in terms of who it's affected most, it's mainly the elderly, right? So it's mainly over that certain age group.
Mark, don't they count?
They do absolutely count. But what I'm saying is, why are people, my age, around 20, 30, going out panic buying face masks? What I would say is, I in a sense, if I bought a face mask myself, I would think it's pretty selfish for me to do that. I think let the people who need it, the hospitals, the elderly, take those face masks. Like me using it, it's like, I wouldn't be worried if I caught it, to be quite frank with you. Is that, like, the extreme? I would just self-quarantine, but I'd expect my body to be able to handle it. It's more going to affect the elderly in the poor.
No, which statistics say, of course, you would, and Mark, that is right. Look, I don't want there to be any sense of mass panic over it, but I do think it makes sense, given the human and economic consequences of this. It does make sense for the government, to do everything it can to stop the spread. And I just can't live with the fact that these flights are coming in from Milan and Venice today to airports all over the UK, and we're not checking anybody.
Well, what do you expect them to be able to do now?
It's not very hard.
It's already come into the UK. So it's going to spread sooner or later. You're just delaying the inevitable.
I just don't buy this. Look, all right, it's already here.
I tell you what they can do.
Go on.
Tangible. And this is more companies, not the government, right? I would say companies stop flying people into pointless VC conferences across the globe, in terms of getting them face-to-face with individuals. You've got online these days, just do virtual conferences. That's one way of stopping the spread. And where possible, let people work from home. Like myself, I've been working from home for the last 2 months. That's what my company has allowed me to do because of this.
Yeah, no, and I understand that.
Can make a difference.
I understand that. So in Moscow, Mark, if you want to go onto the underground in Moscow, before you're allowed to walk down the steps, someone places something on your forehead and measures your temperature, okay? And if you've got a high temperature, you're not allowed to go on the underground in Moscow. Now, I'm not necessarily saying we have to be that draconian, but if there's a plane load of people coming in from Tehran right now to Heathrow, do you not think that a sort of 40-second medical check on each of those people might just make a little bit of sense, even though it's here already? Why should we encourage the spread of it?
No, I agree on that point.
Something
that is like you see it in the rest of Asia. Actually, when I've gone on, when I've gone travelling, you'll walk past it. They have the heat sensors, right? But my point on that's not going to pick everyone out, right? That's only going to pick a subset who are probably later down the stage of having caught this for a week or so.
Well, but shouldn't we be trying?
I don't think it picks it up straight away.
No. All right, you may be right, Mark. Listen, thank you for your long-distance call, and good luck with everything there in Hong Kong. And Mark hunkered down and working from home. But he says some sense of normality has come back to Hong Kong supermarkets. What I heard 3 weeks ago, it was all going crazy there. And looking at some of the stuff online about UK supermarkets, I mean, panic buying in the most extraordinary way, and people loading up with hand gels and then selling them online for 4 or 5 times the price. Neville says to me, simply taking temperatures at airports does not work. You would need to take swabs. We have limited capacity to analyse those swabs. Well, Neville, you may be right, but shouldn't we at least be trying? I think we should be trying, but hey, Lisa says, all football matches are just carrying on. I think we're all in denial. Lisa, I think the reality of that is that in a football crowd, I mean, would one person infect more people than they would in a local pub on a Saturday night if it was crowded? I'm not sure. I'm just, whether the mass banning of sporting events, maybe it will come to that. I don't know. Lila says, Boris needs to make airports check all people. Pat says, almost every country in the world has this, but next week we invite the world to take part in the Badminton World Championships in Birmingham. The same venue a week later will invite the world for gymnastics. Are we really protecting our own population? Well, Pat, I think the answer is, if we're able to do medical tests on those that are coming in, then yes, we are in a position to protect the population. That's how it seems to me. John is a new caller from Reading. Good morning, John.
Yeah, morning, Nigel. How's it going?
It's going all right. So do you think Boris is providing sufficient leadership in this crisis?
Not really, no. I mean, what is it? They're going on about, we're trying to contain it at the moment. But what you got to look at the lengths that China have gone through to try and contain it. Mass spraying detergents in the streets, in all buildings. And what do? We're being told to wash our hands.
Yep, wash our hands. And if you
that's going to do nothing. And it's like you've just said, they're still letting people fly in from Italy, from Iran. Then they're not trying to contain anything. So, I mean, I'm worried about it, because China, the measures that they went through to try and contain it, yet they still haven't. They're still getting cases.
Well, if you believe the Chinese figures, John, they have to some extent, now limited the numbers, quite drastically. If you believe the numbers of this,
that's the thing, isn't it? You don't really know for sure. If their figures are correct. But the thing is, their figures per day are still higher than ours per day.
Yeah, but then as a percentage, they're much, much lower.
Yeah.
So you can argue. You can argue one against the other. No, John, I just feel that it really that insufficient is being done, particularly with new arrivals coming into the country. I just don't really understand it.
There's just a general lack. I see people in the street, like you said. I mean, a lot of people are still in denial about their personal hygiene. And, it's just worrying. I personally think the numbers are just going to keep going up every day, day by day. And as soon as it's, old people, they're saying old people with underlying medical conditions, I personally think any old person, without even a healthy old person, is going to be at risk.
Yeah, no, that may well be right, John. Thank you. Let's go to Pat, who's calling from Devizes in Wiltshire. Pat, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. I speak from some experience in this, not of coronavirus, but of writing pandemic plans for business.
OK, good.
I'm a risk analyst, and on the whole, government's done a pretty good job. With regard to checking people coming into the country, you always have to weigh up the risk against the benefits. And your problem in this particular case is that your mitigation plan would be flawed because a raised temperature is an indicator of any number of different ailments. You would be picking up all sorts of things. You would bog down the testing system to the point where it would not be able to cope with it, and so therefore your delay in actually picking up those with the virus would be inordinate and would allow them to continue to spread. Johns Hopkins, which has done a lot of work on this, and I would recommend them, they work closely with WHO and with the CDC Centre for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, are saying at the moment that the infection rate is 2 to 3. So for every person infected can infect 3 others. Measles is 1 to 18.
Yeah, I'm aware that there are things that are far more contagious than coronavirus, but I'm arguing with you that there are a few hundred people today coming into Heathrow, Gatwick, Bristol, a few hundred coming into each. Is it really, and given they're coming from a region that's now been put in total quarantine lockdown because so rapid is the spread, is it really beyond our wit to test a few hundred people?
I would suspect that the majority of those coming back are returning travellers to the UK residents because Italy is locking down its own citizens there, so their ability to travel is going to be very much restricted.
Yes.
And our own citizens will, of course, be coming back, and if they are unwell, will be reporting to their GP.
So we just don't bother. We just say, come on, don't worry about it. Don't even try.
They get picked up by the local medicine, which is far more effective.
But that's after they've been on the London Underground and wherever else they've been.
Now there you have a different story. I would not go on public transport as a risk analyst at this moment. I am not using public transport of any description whatsoever.
But Pat, a lot of people can't afford to travel by any other means. Many millions of people can only afford public transport. And frankly, let's say I was working at Heathrow Airport, as tens of thousands of people do, and I was going home, and I was sitting on a tube train next to people who'd just flown in from Milan or from Tehran who had not been checked, I'd be really, really angry.
I would feel pretty pissed off myself, I must admit. But the thing is, you can't lock down the whole country. Which is what you would have to do. Your extreme mitigation plan would do more damage than it would do benefit.
All right.
And you're always at the point where you're balancing the risk against the benefits.
Pat, thank you for the call, and apologies for the language, everybody. This is a Sunday morning. Well, look, Pat's made her arguments. I don't agree with her at all. I do think that it is just outrageous that there are people now sitting on London Underground trains who come in from Milan today and have not been tested. I think it's crazy. I really, really, genuinely do. This is the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, and it's 10:40 Crisis. And by the way, if you have flown in today from Italy, or perhaps if you're crew working for one of the airline companies, I'd be very, very keen to hear from you. Our next caller is Ben, a new caller from Xi'an in China. Ben, hello, welcome to the show.
Hello, Nigel.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to speak to you.
So are you working in China or visiting China? What's your situation?
I'm a student here.
You're a student over there? Right, fine.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And when did you last come back to the UK?
I came back at Christmas last year, obviously, so just before everything started to kick off. And I flew back to China at the end of December.
Yep.
So a couple of weeks later, that's when everything sort of started to come out that things were going wrong.
And how do you, and living in China, Ben, and of course, you know, the Chinese state has a lot more power over individual lives and freedom than the government does in this country. Sure. I mean, how do you feel the Chinese government's handled this?
I think they've handled it unbelievably well. I'm in a city that's bordering the province where the major outbreak, Wuhan, is. But we've been quarantined for must be like 6 weeks now.
Wow.
And it's just starting to relax. We can leave regularly. Some businesses are starting to open. But to work, you still need work permits. All restaurants, gyms, cinemas, those sort of places, they're still shut down. They've been shut down for at least 6 weeks, probably more than 2 months.
So have
now.
you just been just sort of living on subsistence in the shops? I mean, sort of how has life gone on, Ben?
Well, everybody just stays at home. Supermarkets have been allowed to stay open the whole time.
Yes.
But there's checks to get into the supermarkets. You have to provide ID. You have to have your temperature taken. So you can't just go anywhere you want. And you can considerably
buy, and
more
you can buy food.
I imagine
you can buy toilet paper. Yeah.
There's been no sort of panic buying.
Interesting.
Initially there was slightly, but I've always been able to buy toilet paper, soap, detergent.
Okay. Now you've lived through Ben. You've lived through 6 weeks of this, and if the numbers that are coming from the Chinese government are right, they've now pretty much got a grip on this. How do you view from there the way that Boris Johnson is doing it?
It's terrible. So my province, which is similar in size to the UK in population and geographically, we haven't had any new cases for I think it's 15 or 16 days now.
Wow!
So that's why they've started to relax the restrictions, and the cases in Italy are far worse than anywhere in China except for the outbreak, the epicenter, Wuhan. There's no other province in China that's had anywhere near as many cases as Italy. I think the most is maybe 1,000 or 2,000. So it's obviously worked very well. Like the restrictions on flights and checks on people, these should have been done weeks ago, if not months ago.
Absolutely.
But recently there was a province next to mine which had a flight from Iran come in, and they reported that there was 4 or 5 people on that flight that were coming in with the coronavirus. But obviously here, inbound flights from other countries, they're quarantined immediately, so they can't.
Yeah, we're not doing anything like that.
If these people just get on the subway or go to restaurants or sporting events, it's going to spread very quickly. You just have to look.
They're sitting on the underground now. They're sitting on the London Underground now, having come in Heathrow this morning.
But Nigel, Wuhan, the situation is absolutely horrific when it started to outbreak. They've had 70,000 cases, and every city in China, they were sending all their doctors, all their nurses to Wuhan. The entire Chinese military medics were all sent to Wuhan. Like they were so worried that another city would have a similar outbreak that they would just not be able to cope. Like they built 2 hospitals in 2 weeks. Like there was people, they didn't have beds for these people for weeks and weeks. Like people just couldn't get a hospital bed. Like you just don't want to see that in London or Rome or a big city in Europe, because they're not going to be building hospitals in a week.
Was it 5 days they built? So, yeah. I mean, they've got more power to deal with this. But your thoughts on the way the Chinese government have acted compared to the way we've acted are really, really interesting. And Ben, if you wanted now to fly back to the UK, could you?
The entire time they've said I can fly out of China. So even when we were under the harshest of quarantine, they said I could fly back to the UK, and that was just. And you could have come back, Ben.
You could have come back to the UK, Ben, and I wonder you could have just probably just walked straight through Heathrow Airport.
Yeah, probably.
Seems unbelievable.
If there's one flight coming in from Iran and they find 4 or 5 people on it, they're infected. I don't know how many flights from Iran go into the UK, but there must be lots of flights from Italy, Korea. These 3 countries have had serious outbreaks.
Yeah.
So those flights should be shut down completely, in my opinion, and these should have been done 2 weeks ago, and flights from China should have been shut down when it initially started.
Ben, fantastic call. Thank you very much. And you've lived through a very difficult 6 weeks. I'm pleased that it sounds like it's easing, and we wish you well with your studies there in Xi'an. Well, wasn't that really, really interesting? And you know, but we're not a communist state. We don't have the power to completely shut down. We will continue this debate in the next hour, but after the news, I'm going to be joined by Ian Duncan-Smith, who is very much leading a rebellion over Huawei. This is going to come to a head in the House of Commons on Tuesday, we think, if the timetables stay as they look. And, you know, this is Boris's first really big test with his own party. Quite a big backbench rebellion brewing. Whether they've got the numbers to defeat the government of this, I don't know. Personally, I hope so, because I keep telling you, I've been to America. I can't see a trade deal with America. The Five Eyes intelligence partnership, many things threatened by involving China in our 5G network. Ian Duncan-Smith in a couple of minutes. And in particular, you know, if you've flown in today to Heathrow or Bristol or Gatwick from northern Italy, maybe even from Tehran into London, and whether you're a passenger or particularly aircrew, you know, I'd like to know, do you think enough checks are being done at UK airports? Because I simply don't. Before I get back to your calls and thoughts on that, the government faces potentially quite a big test this week, and it's a very, very important subject. You know, over the last few weeks, we've debated Huawei's role in the 5G network extensively, and it appears something of a rebellion is now brewing. And I just wonder, you know, are there enough backbench conservatives who are prepared to say, we simply can't support this? And there is an amendment that has been put down to the Telecommunications Infrastructure Leasehold Property Bill, and the amendment would say that Huawei would not be involved at all in the UK's mobile phone networks by the 1st of January 2023. And this is something I feel incredibly strongly about. I don't believe there's any prospect of a trade deal going through US Congress all the while Huawei is involved in this issue. I even, you know, when I was out there a few days ago, people talking openly now about the Five Eyes intelligence sharing partnership. And remember, that is us, it's Australia, it's New Zealand, it's Canada, the USA. People openly saying, oh, forget about the Five Eyes, it'll become the Four Eyes if the United Kingdom continues on this course. And Ted Cruz, Texan senator, guy who had a tilt at the presidency a few years ago, he said 4 eyes better than 6 eyes. So there is potentially a lot at stake here. That's my feeling. Well, joining me now is a former leader of the Conservative Party, an ardent Brexiteer, and somebody who was very much at the forefront of trying to get this decision changed, and it is Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, MP for Chingford and Woodford Green. Sir Ian, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. Good morning.
Good morning. I've just laid out the fact that this amendment has been put down for debate on Tuesday. I have to say, personally, I think this is desperately important. Could you just explain to people why you've got the date of 2023 on this?
Well, first of all, I just caught the tail end of what you were saying, but you're right. The real problem it's got is right now the UK has no friends, literally no friends amongst any of its allies over this issue. It's not just the Five Eyes that you talked about, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, America, and ourselves, but all of those are opposed to it. Australia is vehemently opposed to it, and they have a lot of trade with China, and they're not going to be pushed around. But beyond that, it's like they aren't doing it in Vietnam, is refusing to have Huawei on. France has said they'll do it, Ericsson. Germany's now humming and hawing and going towards some other Western producer. One by one, everyone is basically saying the UK's got this wrong, and we're still, I think, rather arrogantly saying, well, we think we can contain this, and we can't. And so we put the amendment down because we were scratching around trying to find a way to see if we can reverse this. So the telecommunications bill, which is not directly to do with the Huawei issue, but does have a scope for us to amend it for any producer on these networks, whether they be private networks or, for that matter, 5G. What we put it down is saying, right, well, you won't be able to use Huawei or any other untrusted provider after the 31st, 2022. The reason for that is because it gives them a chance to get them out of the systems, and they're in 4G and things, and we need to get them out.
Yes.
So we're just being reasonable about it, but we're saying to the government, okay, if you don't like that date, tell us when.
Yeah, okay, no, that does make sense. And Ian, tell me, do you have the numbers?
Well, you know what it's like in-house. We've just been elected, the Conservative government with a large majority, and people are therefore somewhat, concerned. They don't want to start and cause trouble. But I think the truth is we have a very significant number of people who are, at the moment, MPs, that is, deeply...
I've lost him. It was a rotten line anyway. We were struggling a bit there, but I think Ian Duncan-Smith was going on to say they've got good numbers and they're confident. I guess what they will hope is that Boris will back down before being defeated. I did hear from another Conservative backbencher who feels strongly about this morning, that the Labour Party are absolutely on board with what the rebels are trying to do. So there is, Boris facing a major defeat in the House of Commons, potentially on Tuesday. I hope he changes his mind before he gets there. And the reason, as Ian Duncan-Smith said, that they're talking about 2023 is not only would we not involve Huawei in the new building of the 5G network, but it would give us a couple of years to phase out the equipment they've already got in part of the existing 4G structure. And, well, look, folks, you know how I feel about this. I think there are some things the government's getting right. I think its positioning, its attitude towards Brexit, the behaviour of the chief negotiator, David Frost, at the moment, I can't praise it enough. But this particular decision over Huawei, I think, is the worst decision we've seen by a British government for many, many years. I desperately want to see it reversed. And as Ian said, it's not just the English-speaking world that think this is a mistake. Countries like Japan, Vietnam, and the Germans now having a big debate about this as well. Now, another area where I do not think we've got sufficient leadership is on this whole coronavirus situation. Maria is a new caller from Southampton. Maria, good morning.
Morning, Nigel.
Good morning. So, is the government handling this well?
Well, I woke up this morning to an email from my daughter's sixth form college saying a child had been diagnosed, or a young person had been diagnosed with coronavirus, and they were isolating. There's nothing about deep cleansing, and I was told my daughter should still go into college. She's doing A-levels, and she's going to go on to do product design at university, so she has to go in to finish projects there. Then I spoke to my husband, who's a taxi driver, who's been sent to Gatwick, and found out on the way the flight he's picking up is from Verona in Italy.
And how does he feel about that?
He's diabetic, he's over 60, and I am an asthmatic. and I look after my 85-year-old blind mother. And to be totally honest with you, I've got all the disinfectant ready, the bath to run, the washing machine going, but I just think it's totally outrageous. You look at somewhere like Malta, where the doctors' union there said if the cruise ship that was heading for Malta and had one case on it docked, they would go on strike, and Malta averted that cruise ship going into dock. It just seems like, you know, my husband being a taxi driver, last week he told me that he picked up somebody who travelled from Australia, where she was checked with her temperature and everything.
Yes.
Stopped off at Hong Kong, was checked, got to Heathrow, nothing.
Nothing. Maria, absolutely nothing. And that was my experience last Sunday morning when I was there early. Yeah. No, well, Maria, obviously very concerning for you. And yeah, we should be checking people at Gatwick and Heathrow and elsewhere, shouldn't we?
But it's awful, Nigel, because people like my husband, he's self-employed. He can't afford not to work. If he doesn't work, we don't pay the mortgage, we don't pay the utility bills, we don't feed the children.
Yeah.
And what are we supposed to do?
Maria, I don't have an answer for you other than I don't think he should be having to pick people up who've come in unchecked from Italy or Iran or South Korea. Maria, thank you for your call. And doesn't that call in so many ways just show you, you know, that people really are beginning to get slightly worried about this? And you take her case, you know, diabetes in the family, aged mother living with them. I understand it very much indeed. Darren is a new caller from Kent. Darren, good morning.
Hi there, Nigel.
Good morning. So, has Boris provided the right kind of leadership in your view?
Look, I'm a working dad. I've got 3 boys, wife. I think all the information that we've received, or I feel we've received as a family, has been absolutely bang on the money from the government and from the relevant health services. I think there's been transparency. And you know what, to a degree, there's an edge of panic about it, and understandably. And I think that they've got the balance absolutely bang on the money, the government.
What information have you received, Darren?
I think everything we've seen from press releases regarding what we should do as far as sanitising is concerned.
Other than washing your hands, what single piece of advice or leadership or example has Boris Johnson given you?
Well, we only have to look at the press releases regarding, you know, the cases. I mean, look at this is a country with, you know, how many 30, 40 million people. And don't get me wrong, this is serious. And I'm not being complacent about it, but we've got 168, 200 cases. And I think we're taking it really, really seriously.
Do you? Do you really think that? Do you really think that people flying into Gatwick, you know, not too terribly far away from where you live, right now, coming in from northern Italy and not being checked and getting on public transport, do you really think that makes sense?
First of all, Nigel, I don't know what facts you've got, because I certainly don't have any facts regarding this. For example, do we know what they're doing in Tehran and Italy? Do we know if they've conducted tests themselves?
What we do know is that at many airports all over the world, people arriving in countries are being checked and indeed, if necessary, are being quarantined. And what we do know, Darren, is that in this country we have done diddly squat. That's what we do know.
What I'm saying is, do we know what's happening at the other end?
We know that 16 million people today have been quarantined inside the region of Lombardy, and they're not allowed to leave it and move to the rest of Italy. But if you want to get on a plane and leave Italy, that's fine.
Oh, listen, Nigel, I'm with you. All right, if there's no due diligence at the airports, all right,
that's my worry.
This is a simple fact that if there's nothing being done at the other end, I mean, if the governments are communicating, there's assurances that look, the passengers coming into the country have been tested and they're clean, that's cool. But if that's not the case, that's a huge issue. But I mean, we should at least allow someone from the government. And listen, I'm not being pro-government here. Don't get me wrong. I'm far from a politician, but someone's at least got to give them a platform to speak. Because I think the problem we have, Nigel, and me as a dad, is this is a time for unity. between the media and the government. And with respect to you, I think it's a valid point, but these sort of points what are being made regarding what's happening with these flights coming in is a reason why we've got no bog roll and pastas in the supermarkets.
I don't necessarily see the direct link there, Darren, but by the way, I'm not trying to spread panic. In fact, we had a virologist on at 10 o'clock today who I think was the most calming person, Darren, you could have listened to. He said, it's going to be okay, we will sort this out, it'll take time.
Nigel, he was absolutely fantastic.
Wasn't he good? Wasn't he good?
He was fantastic.
Yes.
He had a platform for 7-8 minutes.
Yeah.
But with respect to you, Nigel, look, I'm not knocking you, it's a great point.
If you like.
But this platform's for 4 hours now. And let me tell you, everyone and I'm not saying that people are naive, but without cast iron 24-carat facts regarding these flights and these passengers, this sort of platform could create a little bit of panic and hysteria.
Darren, I'm sorry, Darren, I came through Heathrow Airport last Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, all right, when already, in many, many parts of the world, checks were being done, not just at airports, but at train stations, underground stations, in other big cities in the world, and there was nothing, no one. Maybe the odd leaflet being given out. Darren, you're a great sport, thanks for the call. This is the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, here on LBC, exclamation mark, with me being German. Well, that's not necessarily the reason why, is it? Plenty of Germans do agree. Anyway, I'll go on. But on this occasion, re COVID-19, I agree with you totally. No leadership. Late or no appropriate decision-making. My husband is a consultant in the NHS. I can't see any safety measures being undertaken to protect NHS staff. Thank you, says Iris. Chris says, morning, Nigel. Given that this disease is unprecedented, should we not give Boris and his cabinet a little more slack? I feel they're doing their best. Well, Chris, I'm sorry, I don't feel they're doing their best. If we really, really, really want to stop the spread of this disease, and we know this disease is spread human to human, then what we do not want are more and more people coming into the country who've got it, adding to the problem. And if that means allocating some resources to checking a few hundred people who've come into Gatwick or Bristol or wherever else it may be, then frankly, I think that should have been done, not today, but I think when I was there last Sunday morning at Heathrow Airport, there should have been checks of some kind going on. I really do believe that. Jim says, was just checking online, you can still fly to Milan tomorrow and return on the same day if you want to. I think the government need to look at this. Why are we importing more viruses into the country? Yeah, I looked on Saturday, it was 38 quid. Day return to Milan, if that's what you wanted to do. And it's a bit confusing, and, Mike in Fulham says, well, hang on, surely the planes are empty if Milan's in lockdown. It would appear it's not in lockdown for foreign visitors, Mike. That, I think, is the point. And I think if you're an Italian, you can probably get on a plane and leave. What you can't do is get on the motorway and leave the Lombardy province. Nigel, I'm a private hire driver who does solely airport transfers, mainly between Gatwick and Heathrow. The company I work for rely on my 15% commission. I am really petrified for my 80-year-old mother and 95-year-old great auntie who I'm in constant contact with. Simon, yeah, we just had the wife of a taxi driver, private hire driver, on earlier, and she was pretty worried too. On Twitter, my friend left Thailand last week. There was voluntary testing at Bangkok Airport. He arrived in Heathrow, where there was voluntary testing. I have heard on some days there is voluntary testing, although quite how public it is amongst all the noise and confusion and chaos of what lane should you be in anyway, certainly not enough is being done in my view. Sue in Perthshire is the radical here. She says they could have contained it if they'd shut everything down from the start. And that is the balance, isn't it? The balance is that you want to be concerned but not spread panic. The balance is you want to take appropriate action but not crash the economy simply for the sake of it. And I get this, and I'm not pretending it's an easy position for anyone to be in. But when the Prime Minister openly contradicts on the very same day what the Chief Medical Officer has to say, I ask myself a question. And when I see how airports all over the world are dealing with incoming passengers, especially those coming from high-risk areas, I say we're actually playing catch-up. We're actually behind the curve on this. We're not leading from the front. That's my feeling. Ellie is a new caller from Harlow. Ellie, good morning.
Good morning. I was just wondering whether there was a better approach than just kind of a blanket
phased, phase contain, phase delay, and whether the government should really be looking at it from what's going to be riskiest. And I would agree that flights, coming in from directly affected regions is a risky one. But we've also got things like there's a conference next weekend of 40,000 photographers that will all be meeting and trying out cameras, things like that happens every year, coming from all over, UK and abroad, and you just kind of can't help but stop and think, hang on, I'm picking something up, I'm trying it out, I'm putting it back down. Joe Bloggs is coming along and doing the same. Surely something like that is also quite risky. And so I think instead of just a blanket phase one, right, now we're in phase two, I wonder if things really need to be thought about. This is a risky thing.
Is the logic,
from directly affected regions are risky as well.
Is the logic, Ellie, that if you were to say, now look, there's a conference of 40,000 photographers, then maybe the logic would be that we say that we'll ban crowds at Premier League football matches, at the Six Nations rugby. Do we literally just close down all public activity in the country?
I'm not necessarily sure it's closed down all public activity. Maybe it's because I'm thinking. I mean, I'm a kind of safety regulator person, and maybe I'm thinking with that kind of I do risk assessments all day, every day, and you look at things, you go, right, we know this is risky, but how risky on a kind of scale, and you approach the things and put your effort into the things that are the most high risk. Notwithstanding, there are other things as well. But maybe it is happening and we just don't see it. But I think it would maybe help if there was a bit more visibility on, okay, so we're looking at all these events where events or flights or however it may be, transport systems, and really thinking what's the most risky? Where can we focus our resources?
So do you think, Ellie,
we're stretched?
Do you think I'm right in my criticism of those flights coming in today from northern Italy and they weren't being checked?
I think definitely on a scale of riskiness, I would say it's high up there to say, look, you've got someone coming in from a region that it itself is in lockdown, and with no checks at all. There were a couple of callers earlier saying, well, what's the point? It's already here.
I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe that.
Well, you've got to have something, and if you identify flights coming in as being a risky thing, do something about it. If you identify them as not being a risky thing, alleviate the public fear by kind of educating on why
and tell us why. Absolutely, tell us why. No, I agree with that, Ellie. Thank you. And anybody from the government, please, 0345 6060 973. Please explain to me, and I sense a majority of you listening to this or watching this right now. Please tell us why it just isn't a problem. I tell you what, I bet no one calls. Jennifer is calling from Ealing. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Nigel.
So,
I personally think that this government is very good at paying lip service to things, but not doing anything very constructive. And if you wind the clock back a few weeks, we had people being flown in from China under very, very strict conditions. They were put in quarantine. They had to wait a while to get all the things together because it was so serious. Then we had a cruise ship where there were British people on it,
yes,
who weren't brought home and caught the virus because they were left there. And so to start with, it was all systems go, and it was all very serious. And then suddenly it's got all very laxed, and like you say, people are flying
as you say, we brought people in and they were sent up to the Wirral to be quarantined.
That's right.
And because they'd been in risk area and all the rest of it. And yet today you can come in from a region of Italy that's been put on quarantine and not be checked.
Quite. And what's going to happen, it's all to do, I still believe, as like you, it's a lot to do with the economy. They don't want to upset the airlines, etc., etc. But I think this can only get worse. So at the end of the day, say another 4 weeks down the line, we've got to do the things that we should be doing now, which is stop the transport of people backwards and forwards from these countries, take precautions wherever you can, and the country may suffer financially, but it's going to in the long run anyway.
Yeah.
And regarding supermarkets, why haven't the managers of these supermarkets had the foresight to see what the mentality of people is like and limited the toilet rolls and the hand wash and all that right from the very beginning?
Well, I think that's happening.
It's not fair on some, say, elderly person who only goes shopping once a week for their things, and they cannot then get what they
Jennifer,
want.
that
they
is
might
happening.
even have to get a taxi to get there.
That is happening. That is
I
happening.
have
Some supermarket managers are now acting and are limiting the number of certain products
it's like
people can
shutting
buy.
the door after the horse has bolted. And I have a particular interest in all this because my husband has COPD. So we are very, very worried about... I mean, he gets enough sort of chest infections anyway without, his immune system is shot to pieces. So without all this going on, and I really do think that we are being let down, but they do not like telling people what to do, and people do not like complying to the rules and regulations of the country. And this is what's happening. They don't want to upset anybody again. And this is what they're frightened of doing. And I just think we're in an appalling situation, and I think that we haven't done enough. It's a very small country. It's a small island, and this could be rife all over the country if we're not careful.
OK, Jennifer, thank you very much indeed. Well, some very, very split opinions there about how well the government's doing. Leslie said, Boris's true colours shine brightly. He's interested in keeping the travel industry afloat by allowing tourists to travel in and out of places like Italy. Well, Leslie, Flybe collapsed the other day. The Prime Minister would not want, of course, to oversee the closure of hotel chains, cruise line companies, airline companies. If he doesn't want to precipitate that. And I can understand the caution, but I don't think checking individual passengers coming into those airports today and for the last couple of weeks would actually have damaged those airline companies in any way at all. This is the Sunday edition of Nigel. Absolutely everything, our thoughts, and we're having this debate, are the government doing enough? Is Boris giving real leadership? Two other quick points before we get back to it. The first is, you may have seen Harry and Meghan have been visiting the United Kingdom. Meghan giving speeches at schools, and then they appeared last night at a big event at the Albert Hall, and Harry was dressed in the uniform of the Captain General of the Royal Marines, a quite magnificent-looking uniform, and he got a standing ovation from the crowd, and almost certainly that will be the last time that Prince Harry wears a uniform as Captain General of the Royal Marines. And he isn't just leaving this country to go out and live on the West Coast. He isn't just leaving his own family, the Windsor family, here in the country. He's leaving the family bond that is the strongest one that he's had in his life, and that's his association with the military. And this is a hell of a thing for Harry to be doing. I just hope he's thought this through, because I think he could miss it absolutely dreadfully. Second quick point. Amber Rudd. I mean, she's more of a liberal than a conservative. She's hardly a right-winger or anything like that. And yet, she was invited by the Oxford Feminist Society to go and give a speech because it's been International Women's Day. And sort of half an hour before the event, it was boycotted. She was effectively no-platformed because she'd been in charge at the Home Office at the time of the Windrush scandal. If you start off by arguing that you don't want certain speakers to come to your university, for example, you don't want Nick Griffin of the British National Party coming and speaking at the Oxford Union, or Marine Le Pen, or whoever it may be. Now, you may very well think that the views that Nick Griffin's BNP held were objectionable and wrong and bad, and that Articles 2 and 3 of their own constitution were discriminatory in every way. And I think actually you'd have been right. But as soon as you start banning people like Nick Griffin, as soon as you start closing down speech, rather than taking the grown-up approach, which is allow people to put their views out, and sunlight is the very best disinfectant for things like this. They would be exposed for what they were. Rather than doing that, this banning culture kicked off. And it's now reached even Amber Rudd. I mean, it's even reached Germaine Greer. Germaine Greer, who's fought for women's rights for over half a century, aggressively, said that men dominate the world too much and women have had an unfair deal. But now, because some people who were born as men want to identify as women and insist that they should be able to do all the things that women do, including playing rugby teams or whatever it may be, because Germaine Greer thinks that's wrong, suddenly she's transphobic. And so we see small minorities with different interests managing to to dominate debate to such an extent that we're closing down real free speech and debate in this country. And I have to say, I felt pretty sorry for Amber Rudd, turning up to that empty lecture room at Oxford. And I think it says a lot more about the university, says a lot more about elements of our nation's youth than it does about Amber Rudd, who I may not agree with on everything politically, but goodness me, as somebody, as a woman who'd risen up to become, very senior cabinet minister, of all the people you should want to hear from at an event commemorating International Women's Day, I would have thought it was her. OK, back to coronavirus. Is the government doing enough? What about panic buying? What's your local supermarket like? Helen says shops should be issuing soap sanitizer and loo rolls and tin goods to each home. So none of this selfish... Oh, Helen, come on. There are 27 million letterboxes in this country. The idea that the sort of a little, emergency package would be delivered to every house, it isn't very practical. And indeed, Matthew Hancock, the Health Secretary, has got in some real hot water over this. He suggested on Thursday night, on Question Time, that a conversation was going on with the supermarkets that essential deliveries would be delivered to pensioners around the country. And the supermarkets all said, Mr. Hancock, you're a liar. We've had no such conversation whatsoever. Les says, Nigel, the least they could do is have a nurse and a doctor on each plane testing the passengers, thereby no delay and making it a lot safer for all of us. Les, that's far too grown up and far too practical and far too simple, clearly. And did you hear the news? Did you hear the 11:30 news? And this wasn't staged, but, I was talking about Northern Italy, and the news, read out by Philip Chrysakos, the lead item was, 2 further patients have tested positive for coronavirus in Wales, having recently returned from Northern Italy. It is very likely that someone, or more than one person today, with coronavirus has landed at either Gatwick, Bristol, or Heathrow, or maybe all of them, and has then got in a private hire taxi, has then got on a London Underground and spread this further, and we have not even tried to find out whether they're carrying this or not. And I think that is bad, weak government. I don't want to spread panic, but I think we should be trying to stop the spread of this virus. Keith is calling from Romford. Keith, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. I just really wanted to say that I took the trouble to write to my MP last week with all the points you've raised, really, including the travel restrictions and a number of other, what I consider, poor responses, lack of initiative and, direction and so on. Everything else seems to be responded to with some kind of vague response that options are being considered.
Yes.
And I personally think, this is all too late. Now, most of the early cases, all the early cases came in from people flying into this country. Yep. I can't quite understand why there wasn't an action plan to try and address that. And most of Matt Hancock's responses seem to be along the line of, well, it's too late now.
Yeah, I've had some callers this morning, Keith, say, look, the fact that it may be too late doesn't mean we shouldn't add and compound to the problem, does it?
No, I don't think you will stop it. Because there'll always be an opportunity. I don't think it will stop everybody because of the way the symptoms arise, but even if 2 or 3 people are stopped, that's 2 or 3 people you don't have to then track.
Exactly.
We've been overwhelmed by the number of people who are being tracked. The whole response seems to me vague and lacking direction.
OK.
We can't even tell people not to shake hands, Nigel, which is...
Well, one message is we shouldn't shake hands, and then the Prime Minister sort of almost boasts that he went round the hospital and shook everyone's hand. So, and that was a point Professor Roxford made at the top of the show this morning. He thinks there should be a bit more leadership in that. Keith, thank you for your point of view. Now, John in Market Drayton takes issue with me. I'm really fed up with you, Nigel. You're forever looking for fault. Boris has medical experts, an NHS minister all over the media. Yeah, he does. Boris isn't a medical expert, and if he makes an error, you'll be jumping down his throat and gloating. No doubt we could all do more, especially at airports, but as it is, it's time to pull together, not scoring brownie points. All right, OK, I tell you what, let's not criticise anything ever. Let's just say the Prime Minister's in charge and we have total confidence. John, I want to be supportive of this Prime Minister. I've written a piece published in today's Sunday Express, where I say, that many of us want Boris to succeed. We want Boris to do well. And I have, John, praised him for all the things that he said and thus far done on Brexit. But there is a broader point here about leadership, and it seems to me with the floods. Look, 25 people were killed by that tornado in Tennessee last week. It's a very common thing in America. Where was President Trump on Friday? There, visiting the site, promising help. That is what leaders do. Boris did not visit the floods. That's a lack of leadership. And John, I played you the clips earlier on, where he directly contradicts a few hours later the chief medical officer of this country in terms of where we are. Leadership is about having a grip on things. Leadership is about making tough decisions. And when it comes, when you hear, as we've just heard, 2 further patients have tested positive for coronavirus in Wales, having recently returned from northern Italy. You ring up, John, you tell me why it's a good thing there are now people sitting on the London Underground who've flown in from northern Italy this morning. If you can convince me, I will hold my hands up and say surrender. Let's go to Lucy, who's a new caller in Mitcham. Lucy, good morning.
Hello, Nigel. Great to speak to you. It's really good to have this conversation.
It's important, isn't it?
Me and my partner travelled back from Venice on the 24th of February, came back into the country. We were due to actually fly to Tokyo the following week on the 4th of March. However, we spoke to NHS England, and we were given the swab and told to self-isolate in accordance with Public Health England. However, so we've been in isolation. We couldn't travel because we were under quarantine, and apparently the airline company won't give us a refund for the travel. So they seem to be making up their own rules. They're going against NHS Public Health England advice, and they're not responsible, and they need to be accountable and pay people cancellation if they...
So you've done the responsible thing, which you didn't have to do.
Yeah.
But you've done the responsible thing and you're paying the price for it.
Yes.
And can I ask, with flights to Tokyo, so what sort of money has this cost you, Lucy?
There's an outstanding sort of 1,100. Apparently the hotel, we can get that back. But apparently the airline will not give the money back, which seems... Why would you want to travel spreading potential virus to everyone else?
I hate to hear of people who get punished and penalised for doing the right thing, and you were trying to do the right thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Lucy, I wonder, those people that have landed today from Venice, and indeed those that have come in from Milan, and they're sitting on the Underground as we speak, aren't they?
Yeah, but being aware, surely the airline having that information would have been aware and should compensate the passenger.
I agree, Lucy. I agree. I'm sorry. That's
how to take it forward is the issue.
Yeah. Well, you've raised it on LBC, and that's not a bad. And I tell you what, it's not a bad place to start, Lucy. Honestly, thank you very much indeed
Thank
for
you very
your
much
call.
for me allowing to.
No. You've raised a very important point. It is rotten, isn't it, in life? The good guys always seem to pick up the bill. I don't know why. Andy in Northampton says, Nigel, in the last 2 weeks, I've been through 6 airports: Birmingham, Gatwick, London City, Tenerife, Geneva, and Chambéry, somewhere in France, I guess. No checks at all, just the odd poster here and there. This is the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it is 11:46 right now, because that, I think, is what really matters. That is how this problem of coronavirus has come into the country. I am just simply astonished that people are coming in today from Venice, from Milan, into airports all over this country, and no checks are being made. My next caller is Lisa from Richmond, although I understand that's an assumed name. Lisa, good morning.
Oh, good morning. Thank you very much for taking my call. I rang because I'm a taxi app driver, and I was in the situation. I had a passenger in my car, and he was talking on the phone about a friend who'd come back from the affected part of northern Italy through Milan airport, and he was refusing to self-isolate. He didn't believe in self-isolation. And he'd been mixing with this passenger, and he was saying, anyway, the incubation period is only 9 days, not 14 days. Well, I'm nearer 70 than 60, and I'm also an asthmatic, and I'm the main breadwinner in the house. And I didn't want to catch this virus off this guy. And so I asked him, would he get out? I said I was concerned by what he was saying. But he said, OK, I'm going to complain about you. And he complained about me to the taxi firm. And now I'm unable to drive. And they won't speak to me. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's because they think I'm at risk, because this guy was at risk.
So this was, Lisa, without naming names, because that would get all of us into terrible trouble, but so you were working for a company, were you?
Yes, I was. And it was last Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And I got taken off the app that day. And since then, I keep messaging, and they say, we haven't got any update for you. I mean, I presume it is this passenger, because he said he was going to complain. But what I'm trying to say is I don't know whether I've been suspended because I asked the passenger to leave the car. And I don't know what the taxi app policy is on it, whether drivers are obliged to carry passengers, even if they believe that they may be at risk.
I don't know. Lisa, I don't know. And best in life when you don't know to say so. But I'm putting an appeal out now for anyone that does know the law on this. If somebody has taken a private fare, do they have to continue to the end? Well, I guess if there was abusive behaviour or violent behaviour, you wouldn't be expected to continue, but you clearly felt you were potentially at risk, Lisa.
Yes, because the passenger thought he was at risk. That was what the whole conversation was about. He said, if this guy's got it, then I'm completely, he thought he said, I'm completely screwed. And I thought, well, where does that leave me? And I didn't really like the way that he was talking, as if I was some kind of lower order and it didn't matter if I caused anything. It was a complete lack of thought, a complete lack of care.
Okay, Lisa, I'm sorry for your situation. It sounds pretty horrid, and I'm putting out this appeal. Let's find out what the law is in your situation, because there must be one. Thank you. Let's go to John, who's a new caller from Orpington. John, good morning to you.
And good morning to you, Nigel. My wife and I are supposed to be in Venice today. We were going on a 4-day break.
Yep.
We're both elderly. We're disabled.
And a nice place to go. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, as I say, we're elderly, both disabled, have underlying health problems, and we need carers. We decided not to go because things like we don't want to be in the airports, on the planes, in hotels with other people. Someone coughs too many times, and then we're stuck in the hotel being quarantined in northern Italy. When we come back, we have to self-isolate or go into quarantine. And I would ask the government, what are my carers supposed to do? We have to have carers coming in to us daily. Are they supposed to not come in anymore, or
it's a very
what happens there?
Well, doesn't that apply to carers, to nurses, to doctors, to everybody that helps other people? John,
absolutely. How can we self-isolate?
Do you know, again, as this story develops, more and more permutations emerge, but you're absolutely right. The situation with carers is a very, very good one, and I don't know the answer to that either. And so you have carers every single day, do you?
Yes.
Yeah. Gosh, John, I don't know. Did you get any of your money back from the airline?
No, none at all. Because of the government won't say to us, don't go. If they said that, or at least said to people like us who can't care for ourselves, don't go. And then we've got a chance of getting our money back. But, of course, Ryanair went out there with the plane, no doubt, less than half full.
Yes.
But, of course, they're being paid for every seat. So they're not going to cancel those planes until the day comes when people stop booking the seats. And then those planes will be cancelled. And that's what will happen in the near future.
Should the government have done more here, John, in your view?
Of course, they should. They should have said that we should not go to northern Italy, and then I could have got our money back.
Well, at the moment there are planes coming into northern Italy, and they were going out there yesterday, and it hasn't happened. John, you raise a very, very good point about carers. What is the situation with carers for those patients that are in self-isolation or quarantine? It's a very, very good point, John. Thank you for your call. Rob is a new caller from Epping. Rob, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you.
Pleasure to speak to you.
Yes, me and the wife, we went out to Venice last Monday, and as we obviously went through passport control, they was obviously all dressed up with a protective regalia in Venice with masks and suits and stuff, and we was checked for temperatures out there.
So you would check. So just to get be clear here, Rob, you would check your temperature was checked at Venice Airport, yeah?
Going into Venice, that's correct, Nigel.
Okay, thank you. And what happened when did you come home?
We come back yesterday morning, flew in about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
And what
and there
happened?
Was no checks whatsoever.
No,
Nothing at all. We was absolutely flabbergasted.
It is unbelievable, Rob, isn't it?
It is. There wasn't even sanitisers there, like for your hands, or it was just obviously just waved straight through.
No leaflets being given out?
Nothing. No.
Literally nothing. And which airport was this, Rob?
This was Gatwick.
Gatwick. But I bet you, Rob, it would have been the same at Heathrow, the same at Bristol, the same anywhere else. Yeah. Well, you are perfect proof of exactly what I've been trying to say. Checks are going on in many other parts of the world. They're not going on here. So what happens to you now, Rob? Are you self-isolating or back to work tomorrow, or what are you going to do?
Yeah, we're back to work tomorrow. I mean, we've got no symptoms in regard to regard to symptoms of this coronavirus. It was actually a pleasure being in Venice because so many people had cancelled going out there.
Yes.
And it was just obviously it was nice to be in an area where it's normally obviously extremely busy, with being easy access to all the main features there.
Well, no, Rob, I've been to Venice many times. Fantastic place. But do you feel that as a returning visitor from northern Italy yesterday, that the government should be giving you advice about, in some way, about what you should not be doing?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
I mean, Rob, I would suggest that maybe you should be tested.
Well, should you only be tested if you're showing symptoms?
Well, the trouble is that by the time you develop the symptoms, this thing may have spread to lots of other places. But look, I'm not a doctor. I'm not pretending to be. Rob, thank you. And Boris Johnson is not a doctor, and he's certainly not pretending to be. In fact, he's very good at contradicting directly what is said by the chief medical officer. I think it's appalling that there are people sitting on London Underground right now who've flown in from northern Italy without any checks at UK airports whatsoever. I'm back tomorrow at 6. At 3 this afternoon, it's Ian Payne. But
we will make America great again.